Oh, goodbye, my Coney Island baby. Farewell, my own true love, my honey. I'm gonna go away and leave you, never to see you any, never gonna see you any. I'm gonna sail upon that ferry boat, never to return again. So goodbye, farewell,
So long forever.
bum bum. Goodbye, my Coney Island. Goodbye, my Coney Island. Goodbye, my Coney Island. We all fall for some girl that dresses neat, some girl that's got big feet. We meet her on the street, then we'll join the army of merry dudes to the altar, just like leading lambs to slaughter. When it's over, oh boy, we'll get it good. Bachelor days we then recall. Rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, doctor, lawyer, merchant, cheat. We all are bound for. Goodbye, my Coney Island baby. Farewell, my own true love, my honey. I'm gonna go away and leave you, never to see you any, never gonna see you any. I'm gonna sail upon that ferry boat, never to return again. So goodbye, farewell,
So long forever.
bum bum bum. Goodbye, my Coney Island. Goodbye, my Coney Island. Goodbye, my Coney Island. My Coney Island babe.
I'm Jacob, and glad everyone could make it today to celebrate Al's life. He was Uncle Al to me. Growing up, we always called him Uncle Al the Kitty's pal. We had he didn't have any kids of his own, but he had 27 nieces and nephews, which he treated like his own kids, and had a lot of fun memories growing up with Al. A lot of our memories were on the water, which is why we've gathered today on the beautiful waterfront to remember Al. I'm going to invite Nick up. Nick is Al's youngest brother of 9 siblings, and Nick's going to share a few words with us.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Nick. As Jacob mentioned, Al was the oldest of 10 in our family. I'm the youngest. 14 years separate us. First, a few quick acknowledgments. Thanks to Larry, as he's been the primary caregiver to Al in his final weeks, hours, and ultimately now to tie up his remaining affairs. Thanks to Kay for handling the load of air travel for any of those of us that chose to make the trip to Chicago last week for Al's funeral. And a special thank to Jacob and Lola for putting together today's events. At the very end of the program, many of you hold in your hand is a great reference about Al's habit of overcoming serious shite and still coming out smelling like a rose. It seems like a natural topic for me to use as a backdrop to typify how he lived his life. With that said, I'm an aviator. When things go bad in the air, there's usually at least one of us that has that missing piece of information to make the whole thing and a non-issue that we laugh about later over a beer. It happens every day. It's called CRM, or Crew Resource Management. But every now and again, something unusual happens where 2, 3, or even 4 smart people turn a salvageable situation into a smoking hole. I was lucky enough to be surrounded in his world by people who had that missing piece. It precluded that proverbial smoking hole. As a young boy, he had plenty of distractions with his 9 brothers and sisters that collectively caused more trouble than he alone could do. As a teenager, he had half the Chicago police force behind him, as our father too came from a large family, all cops and a fireman thrown in for good measure. We were well connected, and they too had his back. You couldn't get a ticket in that town if you tried. As a young rocker, Al had enough talent that backed him in his bands with his brothers and friends that helped him keep time and carry a tune. Hang on, Sloopy, Sloopy, hang on. Paul's here, he knows what that's all about. As a middle-aged man, he had friends that were willing to join him on motorcycle rides and scrape him off the pavement, or on the ski slopes, or glacier trek, and called for the occasional medic to sled him down, and once even a helicopter to come and fetch him. A little later on in life, he had a wife named Kathy, although he confided to me later on after she was gone that she truly was the devil. He initially got sick while with her and ultimately separated. Then did what any guy would do. He bought a boat. A big, complicated Taiwanese boat. He once called the Coast Guard to tell him he was sinking as the Crab Nebula was listing heavily. Perhaps you might be able to explain some of this. When the Coast Guard arrived, they radioed over that it'll be okay when the tide comes back in and gets him off the bottom. Seems a rising tide really does lift all boats. Right, Russ? Yeah, shakes his head. He was there. And finally, when he got really sick in his mid-40s, he had miracle workers in our Seattle-based healthcare providers that employed serious doses of CRM and expanded that team further to somehow find another way to manage his care, even though one did not yet then exist. Seems all his life he had someone's back, or someone had his back. We would all like to live forever, but the truth is, 63 years for him is probably somewhat of a miracle. As you probably could tell, or maybe guess, I was his harshest critic. Don't get me wrong, he was my best man in my wedding, and I suggest only a close family member could get away with saying so. But I would sometimes tell him that he could screw up a wet dream. It was all in an effort to get him on schedule and to play nice with the rest of us, just trying to get the job done. His very name became an adjective, and thus we have what we all agree to be called the Al Factor. Some of that's written down right here. The stories are too many to share, but to provide some clarity, I'll have to share at least some. We're Irish, after all. It may sound a bit mean-spirited, it's certainly not meant to be. But for those of us that lived it, it seemed like it was fun for Al then, and now it's funny to us now. Al would hide his candy as a child, hide his keys as a teenager, managed to forget only his wallet as an adult, and still order the lobster bisque. He never liked the back seat, and even once in a rush to get out, he rammed his sister's head into the windshield. We laughed about it the other day with Linda, and as Linda has not forgotten the bump on her head, and my father still remembers writing the check for a new window on her VW Beetle. He was habitually late. His sister-in-law Marion recently said that she would diplomatically call it that he was just being overly careful. While we were all heading out the door, he would be gathering up God knows what to put in his family pack. Careful, all right up to the point of missing the opening credits of a movie, the first song on a concert, cruises, airplane trips, and dinner. Nothing was too important as to not be fashionably late. And in fine fashion, here's the kicker. Al was late for his own funeral. Seriously. While taking care of funeral arrangements 2 weeks ago in Chicago, my sister and I made several references to the Al Factor. The nice undertaker sort of laughed it off, saying there's one in every family. A few hours later, I got a call from the guy, laughing hysterically on the phone, saying now he fully understands the Al Factor. Ever heard an undertaker laugh? Seems Al's remains were stuck in Seattle and could not be shipped for 3 days due to extreme temperatures at the airport in Chicago's areas last week. Meanwhile, we're all there. And he is stuck in Seattle. True to form, one speed, the Al Factor. Although not funny at the time, today they give us a chuckle and portray a guy that's human with faults like any of us. I can't wait to hear my own eulogy. Truth, his blood is thicker than water, and while he sometimes frustrated us because of his trademark ways, he was a jovial sort that had an infectious laugh and childlike style. Through his big family, he was uncle of 27 nieces and nephews, as Jacob mentioned, and now a few grandnieces and nephews. Most of them knew him as Uncle Al, the kitty's pal. The next generation now knows him as Uncle Owl. Funny thing, how a man who never had kids of his own could be such a great and loving uncle. God works in mysterious ways, I guess. While at the wake last week, I noticed those very kids laughing mightily whilst next to his open casket. I snuck up behind to see them taking pictures under the lower portion of the casket. They wanted to see if Al was wearing shoes. True. Had the roles been reversed, I guarantee Al would have been doing the same thing with his brand new iPhone. For the record, indeed, he was shoeless. Al was, and I guess we are all lucky enough to be surrounded by people that every day keep us out of that smoking hole. Look to your left, right, behind, and front. Thank those that have your back. While some may never be quite as quirky as Al, we are all here today because we loved him and thus each other, and in each other we share that common bond. Al touched many lives and proves a sort of circular argument. When you reach out to touch others and touch their lives, in the end it comes back. Many thanks to all that had Al's back, provided fellowship through the various clubs he attended, and generally molded him into the man he became. Know this, his love of participating, being in barber shopping, public television, boating clubs, and coffee clubs gave him great satisfaction. I'm guessing it was Lola that picked the terrific poem titled Unknown Shore that's in your program. I would have loved the relevance to the way he lived his life and the adventurous quest to the unknown. And while it would suggest a quiet departure in Al, we all know otherwise. He was, after all, an adjective. He did very little without being noticed, and now is being sent off in fine fashion, much as a tribute to your being here today. I was honored to do our mother's eulogy a few years back and honored again to participate here today, so it seemed fitting to repeat two things I mentioned then. Thing one, in our Irish world of twisted family humor, we all realize the only difference in an Irish wedding and an Irish funeral is just simply one less person here laughing, joking, and telling stories. The stories are all usually the same and make for good crack. That's an Irish way of talking about just taking stories and embellishing them, turning them into something that's legendary. And thing two, if you have one shred of faith in the good Lord above and the everlasting, it's never goodbye, it's just simply see you later. So Al, take care of the mother, rest well next to her, and for God's sake, save us all some dessert. Thanks all for coming.
Quirky as Al was, Mike would always say, well, I don't know if Al's going to show up or if he'll show up on time or whatever, so let's just get started. So that was always often the case, and sometimes he was on time, but not that often. This song I'm going to do for Al is called Keep Me in Your Heart. It was written by Warren Zevon and Jorge Calderon, and it was written when Warren Zevon, who had a hit with Werewolf in London, when he knew he was dying of cancer, and he wrote it for his children as a memorial to them. So I don't have the singing chops that the C chordsmen do, but I sing this with all my heart.
Great privilege. Probably know him better than any of you, so I want to try to tell you about Al from my perspective and try to do it in less than 10 minutes. Press 61. It's kind of fun to see all the joy here and the smiles and a few tears, but that's the way Al rolled. He was always in positive spirits. As Nick said, you know, even when he was dealt some pretty tough cards, he had a way of looking to the future and, you know, no regrets. So it was always a pleasure to be with Al. So how did he get that way? I don't know. It's kind of mind-boggling. But you know, so he's the oldest kid. Then I came along and sort of kicked him out of his crib, and he was pretty jealous about it. And he let me know that. And as Nick was telling us, you know, he would hide his candy and we couldn't touch his toys, that sort of thing. So that was in the beginning. That was the young Al that I remember. When I look at all these photos, it's so remarkable how we come from, you know, this young man here that's 6 years of age to this fellow over here that's skipper of his boat. It's like he's not the same person, but I know he is because I was there through the whole walk. So what part of Al is sustained through all that is kind of the thing that sort of brings this memory, connects to this memory of the Al of today. I guess through it all, even though he was jealous, he had a little hard time with me coming along, and not only that, but then there was Linda and Eileen and Neil and Mike, Kathy, Chris, and Ann, and Nick, all sort of vying for Mom's attention. So even though we had all that competition come in, he was still just a loving and positive-minded fellow. When I was in college days, I kind of lost track of him a bit. You know, I moved out here to Seattle, and he did this little crazy trip to Guatemala on a motorcycle. And, he went ski bumming in Colorado a little bit. And Paul can attest to that. That's part of Paul's connection from the high school days and college days of Al. And then he caught up to me here in Seattle shortly after that. Got married, and he did some really great things. He got a really good job, bought a big house, goes over there, big, brand new house, and developed a lot, and got married. Never had kids, but my kids were his kids. Loved them greatly, and just shared them, with me and Marion, just like very natural, smooth. Loved the kids. So here he is in Seattle, and he's doing great. And then he got cancer, lymphoma, and that was like a turning point in his life. He went from working to, sick in bed, and the doctor at that point gave him 4 to 6 months to live. So he bought a boat, and a big boat. And he decided he's going to make the most of it. And thankful for the healthcare system that he actually had 20 years. He never really got fully healthy, but he had some really, really good times. And it was his spirit that kept me through all those times. Like I said, he was always positive-minded. He was always looking at what he had. I've never heard him express any regrets, about his illnesses and problems that he's had. He's always been focused on the future. So, it's just in his later years, he got a little. He had a stroke back in October, and he had a boat fire, so that was pretty serious. And he moved into my house while he looked for a place to live, and then he had a stroke shortly after that. So I think his blood pressure must have skyrocketed or something. He drove him into a stroke. And he rehabbed, never complained about that. Those of you that visited him in the rehab center know that. He was positive-minded. He was happy to be there. He's moved back into my house, and we celebrated his birthday on January 12th. We had a good party. We had an apartment lined up for him. He was going to move in on February 1st. Everything was lined up. And then I took him to the doctors where we had a stress test, and it was a little overwhelming on his system, and he had a major stroke, and went and slipped into unconsciousness in the emergency room, and 4 days later passed on the 24th. So we lost him, and we had a good celebration for a funeral. We had 6 of his nieces were the pallbearers, and we called them the 6 Vestal Virgins. Carrie was one of them. I don't know if they were all virgins, but we So, it was Al's style. It wasn't. He didn't say let's do that, but it just seemed to fit for Al. He just liked to do things differently in his life, didn't he? He was not, he just didn't want to be standard, you know, standard guy. He always stood out, and he did that well. So I'm really kind of proud to be his brother. He was always in front of me, and even though he was somewhat dependent on us to kind of take care of him, you know, damn it, he was always, I was always glad to be with him, and he was always positive minded. He always just gave me joy right up to the end. So now he's buried with his mother. He has her all to himself for a few years or more until we move in. But that's kind of the way he likes it. So thank you all for coming here and joining us tonight, this afternoon. Family really appreciates his friends, as Al did. I know how important you all were for him. All those clubs that he belonged to, and all his friends in various walks of life. So appreciate it. Thank you.